Hi Reddit. This is my first post, and I'm using a throwaway account because, frankly, I'm embarrassed and overwhelmed. I'm hoping for some advice, or, at the very least, a place to get this off my chest. My name is David, 37M, and I've been married to my wife, Sarah, 34F, for 10 years. We have 2 kids, a mortgage, and what I thought was a solid marriage. Until now. Sarah and I have always been opposites in some ways. She's the adventurous, free-spirited type who thrives on spontaneity and social connections, while I'm more of a planner and homebody. Those differences used to complement each other. Her energy balanced my stability, but lately, things have felt off. It started subtly. Sarah began spending more time on her phone, always typing away with a small smile or chuckle. I didn't think much of it at first. She has a tight-knit group of friends, and they're always chatting in their group text. But then, her behavior started to shift. She began excusing herself to take phone calls in the other room and locking her phone, which she'd never done before. I dismissed my unease, telling myself it was probably work-related or something personal she wasn't ready to share yet. But things escalated. Sarah started staying out late, claiming she was attending book club meetings or happy hours with coworkers. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? But the frequency of these outings grew to the point where they started to interfere with our family routine. There were nights when she'd come home long after the kids were in bed, smelling like wine and perfume. When I asked her about it, she'd wave it off with a breezy, "Oh, time got away from me," or "We just got so caught up in conversation." Still, I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid, controlling guy who questions his wife's every move. So I let it slide. I told myself that we were just going through a phase, that she was enjoying her social life, and that there was no reason to worry. But the doubts lingered. One night, while Sarah was out at her book club, I was helping our daughter, Emma, with her homework when she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Why does Mommy go to the gym so much?" she asked, her voice innocent and curious. I frowned. "What do you mean? Mommy doesn't go to the gym at night." Emma shrugged. She said she was going to the gym the other day, but she didn't wear her gym clothes. She wore her pretty shoes. I felt a strange pang in my chest. Sarah hadn't mentioned going to the gym in months, and she certainly didn't dress up for it when she did. I didn't press Emma for more details. She's just a kid, after all, but her comment planted a seed of suspicion that I couldn't shake. Later that evening, after Sarah returned home, I casually asked her how her book club meeting had gone. She gave me the same vague answer as always, describing the group's discussion in broad strokes without any specific details. When I asked what book they were reading, she hesitated for a split second before rattling off the name of a novel I recognized as a popular title from a year ago. That night, as Sarah slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was I reading too much into things, or was something going on? I hated the idea of snooping or invading her privacy, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. The tipping point came a few days later when I found a strange receipt in Sarah's purse. It was for a high-end hotel across town, dated for the previous Friday, one of the nights she'd claimed to be at book club. The receipt included a charge for drinks and appetizers at the hotel bar. My stomach churned as I stared at it, the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. When Sarah came home that evening, I tried to play it cool. "Hey," I said casually as she poured herself a glass of wine. "How was book club last week?" She smiled. "It was great. We had a really interesting discussion about the book." "Oh, what book was it again?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She hesitated, then repeated the same title she'd mentioned before. "You should read it. It's really good." I nodded, pretending to be interested, but inside, my suspicion grew stronger. I decided not to confront her just yet. I needed more information, more evidence. If I was wrong, I didn't want to damage our marriage by accusing her of something she hadn't done. But if I was right, I needed to know the truth. After finding the hotel receipt, I couldn't let go of the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Sarah had never given me any reason to doubt her before, but the inconsistencies in her behavior were becoming too big to ignore. Still, I told myself I needed more than a receipt to confirm my suspicions. Maybe it was for work, or maybe she had simply stopped by the hotel for drinks with her book club friends. It wasn't proof of anything yet. That weekend, I decided to pay closer attention to Sarah's behavior. On Saturday, she told me she had plans to meet her friend Jessica for brunch. I didn't think much of it at first. Jessica was one of Sarah's closest friends, But when I casually texted Jessica later to ask if she'd enjoyed their time together, her reply caught me off guard. Brunch? We haven't met up in weeks, Jessica texted back. Hope everything's okay. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. Why would Sarah lie about something so small? What was she really doing if she wasn't with Jessica? When Sarah returned home that afternoon, she seemed cheerful and relaxed, as though she'd had a wonderful day. How was brunch? I asked, testing the waters. Great, she said with a smile. Jessica and I had so much fun catching up. She's planning a trip to Napa Valley soon, so we talked about that. Her answer was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed her. But Jessica's text was burned into my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was hiding something. That evening, after Sarah went to bed, I decided to take a closer look at her phone. I hated myself for even considering it. It felt like such a massive invasion of privacy, but the lies were piling up, and I needed answers. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging, and I noticed that she had started using a new passcode. My stomach sank. She'd never kept her phone locked before. Why now? I didn't want to risk waking her, so I decided to wait for a better opportunity. Instead, I began thinking of other ways to gather information. The hotel receipt had included a timestamp, so I decided to drive to the hotel and ask if they had any additional information about the charge. The next day, while Sarah was out running errands, I drove to the boutique hotel downtown. My palms were sweaty as I approached the front desk, trying to think of the best way to phrase my question. Finally, I decided to keep it simple. Hi, I said, forcing a smile. My wife was here last Friday for an event, and I'm trying to figure out which room she might have been in. Do you have any information on that? The receptionist frowned. I'm sorry, sir, but we can't disclose information about our guests. Privacy policy. I nodded, pretending to understand, but inside, I felt a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration because I hadn't gotten the answers I needed, and relief because it meant Sarah's privacy was protected, if there was even anything to hide. As I walked back to my car, I noticed a valet standing near the entrance. On a whim, I approached him and asked if he remembered seeing Sarah. Last Friday? Yeah, I think I saw her, he said, scratching his head. She came in around 7 p.m., dressed really nice. There was a guy with her tall, dark hair, maybe mid-30s. They looked close. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced with questions. Who was the man? What were they doing there together? And why hadn't Sarah mentioned any of this? Armed with the valet's vague description, I returned home feeling more confused than ever. If Sarah was meeting another man, why would she lie about it? And if there was nothing inappropriate going on, why hadn't she told me the truth? That night, I decided to confront her, but I wanted to do it subtly, to see if she would admit to anything on her own. As we sat on the couch watching TV, I casually brought up the hotel. Hey, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. I drove past the Monarch Hotel today. It looks nice. Have you ever been there? Sarah froze for a split second before recovering with a smile. No, I don't think so, she said. Why? My heart sank. Her response was so quick, so definitive, that it felt rehearsed. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I forced myself to stay calm. If she was lying to me, I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. Later that night, when Sarah was asleep, I tried her phone again. This time, I noticed she had left her old tablet charging in the kitchen. It was an older model she rarely used anymore, and I realized there was a chance it might still be synced with her other devices. Holding my breath, I unlocked the tablet. To my relief, the passcode hadn't been changed, and I was able to access her messages. What I found made my blood run cold. There were dozens of messages between Sarah and a contact saved as Jenna. But as I read through the messages, it became clear that Jenna wasn't a woman, it was a man. They had been careful not to say anything explicit, but the tone of the messages was intimate, flirty, and far too personal for a married woman to be exchanging with anyone other than her husband. One message in particular stood out. Last Friday was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Can't wait until next time. Next time. My chest tightened as I realized that whatever was happening between Sarah and this man wasn't a one-time mistake. It was ongoing. The next morning, I couldn't keep it in any longer. I had spent the entire night replaying the messages in my head, each word cutting deeper than the last. Who was this Jenna? Why was Sarah hiding this from me? And what exactly had happened at that hotel? I decided it was time to confront her. As Sarah sat at the breakfast table, sipping her coffee, I took a deep breath. Sarah, we need to talk. She looked up, her expression shifting to concern. What's wrong? I hesitated for a moment before diving in. I know you've been lying to me. Her face paled, but she quickly recovered, trying to play it cool. What are you talking about? I saw the hotel receipt, I said, my voice steady. I know you were at the Monarch last Friday. And I know you weren't alone. Sarah's eyes widened, and for a split second, she looked like she might deny it. But then she sighed, setting her coffee down. Okay, yes, I was there, she admitted. But it's not what you think. Then explain it to me, I said, trying to keep my anger in check. Who were you with? And why didn't you tell me about it? She hesitated, then said, it was just a friend, Matt. A coworker. We were working on a project, and we needed a quiet place to go over some things. That's all it was. Her explanation sounded plausible enough, but the memory of the messages on her tablet told a different story. A coworker? I asked, raising an eyebrow. And what's your coworker's name? Jenna, she said quickly. Too quickly. I stared at her, the pieces falling into place. She was lying again. Sarah, I looked at your messages, I said, watching her reaction carefully. There's no Jenna. It's a man, isn't it? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might confess. But instead, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't believe you went through my messages, she said, her voice rising. That's such an invasion of privacy, Matt. Her attempt to deflect only made me angrier. Don't turn this around on me, Sarah, I snapped. You're the one who's been lying. You're the one sneaking around. So why don't you stop pretending and tell me the truth? But she didn't. Instead, she stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. After Sarah's refusal to come clean, I knew I couldn't rely on her to tell me the truth. If I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. My mind kept going back to the hotel. It felt like the key to everything. If I could figure out what had happened there, maybe I'd finally understand the full extent of her betrayal. I decided to go back to the Monarch and try again. This time, I was more prepared. I brought the receipt with me, hoping it might help me get some answers. When I arrived, I approached the same valet I had spoken to before. He recognized me immediately. Back again? He asked. Yeah, I said. Look, I need to know who my wife was with that night. Can you help me? He hesitated, glancing around nervously. Man, I don't know. I could get in a lot of trouble. I pulled out a $50 bill and held it out to him. Please, I said. I just need to know the truth. He sighed, then took the money. Okay, fine. She was with a guy named Jake. He's a regular here, comes in a lot, usually with different women. I think he's some kind of sales guy. Jake. The name sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know anyone named Jake, but the fact that he was a regular at the hotel only made things worse. What kind of person was Sarah involved with? Armed with a name, I decided to do some digging. I spent the next few days searching online, trying to find out more about Jake. It didn't take long to find him. His LinkedIn profile popped up right away. He worked in real estate, and from the photos he had posted, he seemed like the kind of smooth-talking, confident guy who could charm anyone. I also found his Instagram account, which was filled with pictures of him at fancy events, expensive dinners, and exotic vacations. But what caught my attention was a photo he had posted from the Monarch. The caption read, "Another successful night. Cheers to new connections." The timestamp matched the night Sarah had been at the hotel. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. The evidence was piling up, but I still didn't have the full picture. I needed to confront Sarah again, but this time, I wasn't going to let her dodge the truth. That evening, I waited for Sarah to come home. My heart was pounding as I rehearsed what I was going to say. When she finally walked through the door, I wasted no time. "We need to talk," I said. She looked wary, but sat down across from me. "Okay. What is it?" I took a deep breath. "I know about Jake." Her face froze, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Jake?" she said, feigning confusion. "Who's Jake?" "Don't play dumb, Sarah," I said, my voice firm. "I know you were with him at the hotel. I've seen the messages. I've talked to the valet. I know everything." She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not what you think," she said weakly. "Then what is it?" I demanded. "Because right now, it looks like you're having an affair with some guy who spends his nights at fancy hotels." She didn't answer. Instead, she broke down, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened." Over the next hour, Sarah finally came clean. She admitted that she had met Jake at a networking event a few months ago. He had been charming and attentive, and their conversations had started off innocent enough. But over time, things had escalated. They had begun meeting for drinks, and eventually it had turned into something more. "It wasn't about you," she said through her tears. "I love you, Matt. I never stopped loving you. But I felt invisible, like I wasn't enough." Jake made me feel noticed. Her words hurt more than I could have imagined. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I asked. "You've destroyed my trust, Sarah. How am I supposed to believe anything you say after this?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with remorse. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "But I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." The days after Sarah's confession were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I felt like I was living in a fog, struggling to reconcile the woman I had loved for over a decade with the person who had lied to me, betrayed me, and destroyed the trust we had built. Every interaction with her felt strained. Every word she spoke felt like it carried hidden meanings I didn't have the strength to decipher. Sarah, for her part, seemed genuinely remorseful. She cried often, apologizing over and over, but her apologies didn't erase the pain. She offered to sleep in the guest room, and I let her. I needed space to process everything. I couldn't stop thinking about her words. "It wasn't about you." I felt invisible. Had I really been so blind to her feelings? I had always thought I was a good husband. I worked hard to provide for our family. I supported her art projects, and I tried to be present for her and the kids. But was that enough? Or had I missed something crucial along the way? One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, scrolling through photos of our life together. There was a picture of us from our honeymoon in Maui, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched the sunset. Another from the time we took the kids to Disney World, both of us smiling as we held their hands. These moments felt so distant now, like they belonged to another couple entirely. As I stared at the photos, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep longing for the life we once had. But beneath it all, there was still a flicker of love. Despite everything, I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go of Sarah or our marriage. I knew I couldn't move forward without addressing the other person in this mess, Jake. I wanted to hear his side of the story, not because I expected him to take responsibility, but because I needed closure. I found his office address through his LinkedIn profile and decided to pay him a visit. When I arrived, I walked into the sleek lobby of a real estate firm and asked to see Jake. The receptionist seemed surprised but called him anyway. A few minutes later, a tall, polished man with dark hair and an easy smile approached me. "Jake?" I asked, my voice cold. He nodded, looking curious. "Yeah, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm David," I said, folding my arms. "Sarah's husband." His smile faltered, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. He said. "I figured this might happen." "You figured?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "So, what? You knew she was married, and you didn't care." Jake sighed, motioning for me to follow him to a private conference room. Once the door was closed, he leaned against the table, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not going to make excuses," he said. "What I did was wrong. I knew she was married, but I don't know. It was stupid. I let things go too far." "Too far?" I said bitterly. "You didn't just let things go too far. You knowingly got involved with a married woman and destroyed my family in the process." He nodded, his expression serious. "You're right. I did. And I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone, especially not you. But Sarah, she seemed so unhappy. I got caught up in it, and I didn't stop to think about the consequences." His apology felt hollow, but at the same time, I could see he wasn't completely indifferent. He looked genuinely regretful, though that didn't make his actions any less despicable. "Stay away from her," I said firmly. "If you so much as text her again, you'll regret it." "You have my word," he said, raising his hands. "It's over." I left his office feeling slightly vindicated but still deeply unsettled. Confronting Jake hadn't erased the pain or answered all my questions. But it did make one thing clear. I couldn't let him have any more control over my life or my marriage. After my confrontation with Jake, I realized that I couldn't navigate this situation on my own. The emotions were too overwhelming, the questions too big. I told Sarah that if she wanted any chance of saving our marriage, we needed to go to couples therapy. She agreed without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "I just want to fix this, Matt. I want to fix us." We scheduled our first session with a therapist named Dr. Monroe. Walking into her office for the first time felt surreal, like admitting out loud that our marriage was broken. But as we sat down across from her, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe this was the first step towards something better. Dr. Monroe began by asking us to explain why we were there. Sarah went first, her voice trembling as she described her feelings of loneliness and insecurity, and how they had led her to make terrible choices. I listened quietly, trying to keep my emotions in check. When it was my turn, I didn't hold back. "I feel betrayed," I said. "I feel like the person I trusted most in the world has completely shattered my trust. And I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again." Dr. Monroe nodded. "Those feelings are completely valid, Matt. Betrayal cuts deep, and it takes time to heal. But the fact that you're both here, willing to talk about it, shows that there's at least a foundation to build on." Over the next few sessions, we began to unpack the layers of our relationship. I learned more about the ways I had unintentionally neglected Sarah's emotional needs, while she took full responsibility for her actions. We both cried, argued, and admitted things we had never said out loud before. One night, after a particularly intense session, Sarah turned to me as we were leaving the therapist's office. "Do you think we'll ever get through this?" she asked. I hesitated before answering. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think we're taking the right steps. That has to count for something." Therapy became a routine part of our lives, something that forced Sarah and me to confront the raw truth of what had happened. Each session was a deep dive into our marriage, our communication or lack thereof, our unmet needs, and the cracks that had formed long before Jake came into the picture. While it was painful, it also provided moments of clarity. One session focused on the concept of emotional availability. Dr. Monroe asked Sarah what had been missing for her in our relationship. Her answer was difficult to hear. "I felt invisible," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't that you didn't care, Matt. I know you love me, but you were so wrapped up in work, in providing for the family, that I started to feel like an afterthought. And I didn't know how to tell you that without feeling selfish." Her words stung, but they also made me realize something. I had taken Sarah for granted in ways I hadn't even recognized. I thought working hard, paying the bills, and being a steady presence was enough. But I hadn't been truly present for her, and that had left her vulnerable. Still, her reasoning didn't justify what she had done. "You should have told me," I said. "If you were unhappy, if you felt neglected, why didn't you just talk to me?" "I was scared," she admitted. "I thought if I brought it up, you'd think I was ungrateful or that I didn't appreciate everything you were doing. So, I bottled it up, and then Jake came along, and he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years." I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. "But instead of fixing things with me, you went to him." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake, one I'll regret for the rest of my life. I wish I could take it back, Matt. I really do." Outside of therapy, Sarah was doing everything she could to prove she was committed to rebuilding our marriage. She gave me access to her phone, deleted Jake's contact information, and even changed her routines to avoid any places or events where she might run into him. She also started leaving me little notes, small gestures of appreciation and love that reminded me of the early days of our relationship. One morning, I found a note tucked into my work bag. It read, "Matt, I know words aren't enough, but I want you to know how much I love you. I'm so grateful for the chance to fix this, and I promise to do everything I can to make us stronger. You are, and always have been, the most important person in my life." Her words were sincere, but the pain of betrayal still lingered. Trust is fragile, and rebuilding it felt like an uphill battle. Every time she left the house, a part of me wondered if she was being honest. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt a pang of anxiety. It was exhausting, and I often questioned whether it was worth it. But then there were moments, quiet, tender moments, when I saw glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. The way she laughed at our kids' silly jokes, the way she reached for my hand during a movie, the way she looked at me with a mixture of regret and hope. Those moments reminded me why I was trying. The first major test of our progress came when Sarah's work held a networking event downtown. She wanted to go, but she was nervous about how I would feel about it. "I don't want to go if it'll make you uncomfortable," she said one evening as we sat on the couch. "I'll skip it if you're not ready." Her willingness to prioritize my feelings gave me pause. A part of me wanted to say no, to keep her home where I could see her, but I knew that wasn't realistic. If we were going to rebuild trust, I had to give her the opportunity to prove herself. "You should go," I said finally. "But I want you to check in with me, okay? Let me know when you get there and when you're leaving." "I will," she promised. "Thank you, Matt. I know this isn't easy for you." The night of the event, I stayed home with the kids, trying to distract myself with a movie and snacks. Sarah texted me when she arrived, as promised, and even sent a photo of herself with a group of coworkers to reassure me. It helped, but I couldn't fully shake the anxiety. When she came home later that night, she was glowing with relief. "It went really well," she said, setting her purse down. "I made some great connections, and I even told a couple of people about you. They thought it was so sweet how supportive you are." Her excitement was genuine, and for the first time in months, I felt a small sense of hope. She was trying, and I could see it. That night, as we lay in bed, Sarah reached for my hand. "Thank you for trusting me," she said softly. "I know it's not easy, but it means so much to me." I squeezed her hand, still unsure of what the future held but willing to keep trying. "We're not there yet," I said, "but we're moving in the right direction." Rebuilding intimacy, both emotional and physical, was one of the hardest parts of our journey. There were moments when I wanted to pull away, afraid of getting hurt again. But there were also moments when I felt a spark of the connection we had lost. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, Sarah turned to me and said, "Do you remember when we used to dance in the kitchen?" I nodded, smiling at the memory. "Yeah, you'd always steal the last bite of whatever I was making." She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in what felt like forever. "Let's do it again," she said, holding out her hand. I hesitated for a moment before taking her hand. As we swayed to the music playing softly in the background, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step, one small step toward finding our way back to each other. Even with the progress Sarah and I had made, the shadow of her betrayal loomed over us. It was as though every interaction, every quiet moment, carried an undercurrent of doubt. I knew rebuilding trust wasn't going to happen overnight, but some days it felt impossible. No matter how hard I tried to focus on the present, my mind would drift back to the messages, the hotel, the lies. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Sarah turned to me with a look of concern. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated before answering. "It's hard, Sarah. Some days are better than others, but there are times when I can't stop thinking about what happened." She nodded, her expression somber. "I know, and I hate that I've put you through this. But I promise, Matt, I'm not that person anymore. I'm doing everything I can to prove that to you." Her sincerity was clear, but it didn't erase the pain. "It's not just about proving yourself," I said. "It's about me learning to let go of the fear and the anger. And that's harder than I thought it would be." Dr. Monroe had warned us about this, how trust isn't something that can be rebuilt by one person alone. It's a joint effort, and it takes time, patience, and vulnerability. But hearing it in therapy and living it in real life were two very different things. One of the most difficult moments came when Sarah's work hosted another event at the Monarch Hotel. The idea of her returning to the place where so much had gone wrong made my stomach churn. But instead of hiding her plans, Sarah brought it up to me directly. "They're hosting the event at the Monarch," she said, her voice tentative. "I want to go, but I understand if you're not comfortable with it." Her honesty caught me off guard. A part of me wanted to tell her not to go, to demand that she avoid the place entirely. But I also knew that avoiding the problem wouldn't solve anything. If we were going to move forward, we had to face these triggers head-on. "Go," I said after a long pause. "But check in with me while you're there. And if anything feels off, leave." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Matt. I promise I'll do everything I can to make you feel comfortable." That night, she texted me multiple times from the event, sending photos of the setup, her colleagues, and even the name tag she was wearing. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. When she came home, she immediately sat down with me to talk about how everything had gone, answering my questions without hesitation. It wasn't easy, but it felt like a step in the right direction. As Sarah and I worked through our issues, we began to find moments of closeness that had been missing for so long. It started with small things, a shared laugh over a funny video, a spontaneous hug in the kitchen, a long conversation about nothing in particular. Slowly but surely, those moments began to add up, creating a sense of connection that felt genuine. One weekend, we decided to take the kids on a camping trip, something we hadn't done in years. Being out in nature, away from the distractions of work and technology, gave us a chance to reconnect as a family. Sarah and I worked together to set up the tent, cooked meals over the campfire, and laughed as the kids roasted marshmallows. On the last night of the trip, after the kids had fallen asleep, Sarah and I sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the glow of the flames. "I've missed this," she said softly. "Being with you like this. It feels real." I nodded, feeling the same. It does, I said. I just want us to keep moving forward. I don't want to live in the past anymore. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Me neither. That night, for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. A year after Sarah's betrayal came to light, I found myself reflecting on everything we had been through. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been tears, arguments, and moments of doubt, but we had survived. More than that, we had grown. Sarah and I decided to renew our vows, not as a way to erase the past, but as a way to reaffirm our commitment to each other. It was a small ceremony in our backyard, with just a handful of close friends and family. As we stood under the string lights, Sarah took my hands and looked into my eyes. "Matt," she said, her voice steady but emotional, "I know I've made mistakes, and I know I've hurt you. But I promise to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I love you more than words can say, and I'm so grateful for the chance to start over with you." When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, this year has been the hardest of my life, but it's also shown me how strong we are. I forgive you, not because it's easy, but because I believe in us. I believe we're worth fighting for." As we exchanged rings and kissed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The scars from her betrayal would always be there, but they no longer defined our relationship. They were part of our story, but they weren't the whole story. Today, Sarah and I are in a better place than we've ever been. We've learned to communicate more openly, to prioritize each other, and to never take our relationship for granted. Trust is a fragile thing, but it can be rebuilt with time, effort, and love. If you're reading this and going through something similar, know that healing is possible. It's not easy, and it won't happen overnight, but with the right mindset and a willingness to work through the pain, you can find a way forward, whether that's together or apart. For Sarah and me, it was together. And for that, I'm grateful every day.